Thank you for checking out another project video. My name is Mitch and this is Made by Mitch. Today I'm going to show you how I made this colored pencil holder. So let's check it out. So we needed a way to organize some colored pencils and crayons and things like that in my house, and so I decided to make this colored pencil holder. And the first thing I had to do was rip this scrap piece of plywood into strips. Now you can make it as wide as you want and as long as you want, total preference, but the first thing I did was cut them up and then I would just glue them all together. Gluing them up was fairly simple. I just simply added glue on one board and then I used a scrap piece of wood just to kind of spread the glue out and make it even across the whole piece, and then I repeated this step for all the boards until they were all glued together. Next, I could clamp the boards together, and I did use a couple pieces of scrap plywood here just to put the clamp pressure on. That way it didn't leave dents in the plywood. I would recommend doing this, and then I let it dry for a few hours until everything was good to go, and then I can move on to the next step. I wanted the sides of this box to have a little bit of a taper on it, and so what I did was I tilted the top of my bandsaw and then I added a straight edge. I just used a level and then I clamped this on in place to the top of my bandsaw. Then I would just run this through the bandsaw and then get the taper that way. Okay, so I messed up a little bit on this. The first thing I did was I ran this through the bandsaw and realized that the blade I was using was not the correct blade for this large of a piece of wood. So the blade kept going inside on me. Then I tried to run it through the table saw and it left a little bit of a lip there because the blade depth wasn't what I needed for this. So now I have the resaw blade on here. First I was using this small blade and it just kept moving on me, so it wasn't good for what I needed it to do. Now I've got this blade, it should be good to go. Just a small setback, but setbacks are the best way to learn. So fixing it was pretty easy. The first thing I did was I tilted the blade back up to its 90-degree place, and then I ran it through with the bandsaw just to get that straight edge back, and then I made the tilt back down to 5 degrees, and then I ran it once through, getting the taper on one side, and then I flipped it around, ran it through the bandsaw to get the taper on the other side. And then the next thing I did was I went over to the miter saw just to clean up both ends of this, make sure that it was even all the way around, and then I could go and sand everything up to 220 grit. And next it was time to start drilling the holes for this pencil holder. So I tried making some marks to try to figure out where my holes needed to be, and this was just really complicated, so I decided to try something different. I used a hole saw to give me 4 little circles made out of a scrap piece of 1/4-inch plywood. And then when I got all these cut out, I could just place them on the top of this where I wanted them to be. And while I'm doing this, I wanted to take a second and thank all my patrons over on Patreon, especially my top supporters. Thank you so much for your continued support on my channel. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, I'll leave a link below. After all the holes were laid out and I got everything marked properly, I could start drilling the holes. Now the best way to do this is use a Forstner bit, but I didn't have a Forstner bit that's large enough. So what I did was I used a hole saw. I used the hole saw to go down as deep as I could, and then I used a smaller Forstner bit to kind of route out the middle of that hole, and then I used a chisel and a mallet to get the rest of the material, and then I just kept repeating this process over and over until the hole was as deep as it needed to go, which was around 3 inches deep. It would obviously be much easier if I just had a 2-inch Forstner bit. Could be a lot quicker. I didn't have that, so this really, even though it was a little more time consuming, it worked just fine. If you don't have a Forstner bit, I'll leave a link in the description below of the hole saw that I used for this project, as well as some of the other tools that I used for this build. The holes weren't perfect, but they'll do just fine for what I'm using this for. And next it was time for the finishing process. I decided to use the spray shellac on this just because it dries really quickly and it does a really good job holding up, and so I just did several coats of this, letting it dry in between each coat. the way this turned out, the way it looks. I love the exposed ply. I like how simple it is, but also how functional it is, and it's going to come in great use in our house. If you like this video, you may like some of the other projects like this on my channel. I'll link those right here. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.